Okay, first of and foremost, Anemari and I would like to thank the sponsors, which have been doing a really good job growing this conference. I've been lucky to attend it 3 years and see the whole process, but especially this year because now they are paying the speakers that have to move here to Barcelona and everything, and that's amazing. Yeah, so thank you all for coming here. We're going to share some experience about estimation and whatnot. So, hey Anemari, good morning.
Hi, Javier. How are you?
I'm cool. How about you?
Well, I'm tired. I just got out of this planning meeting, and it was like 2 hours, 8 people in a room. I'm just finished for today. I don't know. I think I'm gonna go home or something.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. Do you do it every week, or?
Well, we do every 2 weeks. Like we have a planning in order to decide what we're gonna do the next sprint. So I guess that's more than enough.
Yeah, the thing is, we actually don't do sprints, but we do use these meetings like refinement meetings to check whether a story in the backlog is ready for development or not. But this is really short. We take like half an hour and then that's it. We don't need more time.
That sounds better.
So why so long and so painful for you?
Well, I think that the most frustrating part, or the part that takes most, is the estimation part. Like we have all of this long discussion. If it's a 3, if it's a 5, whether it's more complex. I don't know. That's very frustrating. We usually just come up with a number and put it there so everybody's happy. But
why do you do it?
Well, we need a plan, right? We need to know what we're going to be doing for the next 2 weeks. We need to tell the business we're going to be working on this so we can know when the feature is going to be ready. So basically that's why we do it. You don't do it? Like, what do you do?
But how is it working so far?
Well, I don't know. If I'm looking at my data, honestly, I don't think it's working so well because we are never accurate. The only time we were accurate was one sprint that we were like only 2 people working because everybody was on vacation and we had like 3 story points in the whole sprint. So we might be doing something wrong.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense because the whole thing that you're describing is based on something that is story points and that kind of estimation, which is never going to work if you think about it.
Okay, why do you say that?
So let me ask you a question. How do your size estimates, story points, t-shirt size, translate into development time?
They don't. That's the whole point where I'm using story points, right? It's not about time. I'm not saying a story takes 3 hours. I'm saying a story it's two story points. So
okay. Let me ask you a different question then. So let's say that you do this estimation process and in the end you have different stories, but can we agree on that if a story is estimated as big, it should take you more time to develop it than if the story is small?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, in the end, yeah, it's about time.
But
I can agree with you.
Is this actually working? Like if you look at, for instance, if you take all your stories, your past stories from Jira, and you run the numbers, and you check, okay, does the initial size estimated correlate with what it took you to develop the story? You will find out that sometimes you estimate something as small, and it takes you longer to develop it than stories that were conceived as
or the other way around, yes. So 5, usually it's 2 days or less.
So for me, this looks like you're basically guessing, no?
Yes, I think we are.
And probably it has to do with the thing that the development time and the complexity that you're trying to estimate is just one side, right?
Well, the idea is that we try to estimate based on complexity, but you know, complexity is such abstract thing. Like I think everyone in the team has a different understanding of what complexity means. So I think that's where the difference in the numbers come into place. So yeah, I guess we are just making a guess on exactly what's the number without actually understanding what it means.
Exactly. So why don't you just stop guessing? Sorry. Why don't you stop guessing?
Isn't that a little bit radical? Like just stop doing it? How is that going to work?
So it's a radical idea in that it addresses like the root problem. You're just guessing and it takes you a lot of effort. So there's a lot of people just claiming and advocating for the opposite thing. So let's not guess anymore. Let's just focus on what's more important and don't spend any time, don't do any more waste on estimation. So this is something you can actually take a look at and try it.
Okay. I will definitely take a look at this.
Cool.
Hi, Javi. How are you doing?
Well, this is a difficult week. It's the beginning of the quarter, lots of friction, lots of meetings. all the time talking with the client, the stakeholders. They want us to plan for the next quarter. It's always super painful to do.
Okay, well, I wanted to talk to you actually, and I'm happy to see you because I started looking into this thing, now estimate, that you told me 2 weeks ago, and I find out that I got into this hole. It's a very controversial topic out there. You didn't tell me that. So I found things like this on Twitter, and then like a lot of people fighting, taking sides. This is good. This is not good. I actually seen that I don't know. Some people do this thing called blink estimates. So they just get into a room for 2 days. Like they get the most experienced people in the room from the business side, from the developer side, and they are like discussing, and after 2 days this facilitator gets a gut feeling that everybody kind of has an idea in their heads on how much it's gonna take and how many people, and they just like write it down on a paper and like come up with the stickers, and apparently everybody is on the same level, so that's their estimation. So yeah, they call it blink estimates, and I don't know, it's crazy, right? Is it really working like this?
Yeah, but I don't know. For me, it's like more of the same, right? It's people sitting in a room, giving their understanding of a problem. It's a lot of work, and once you are dumping estimates, when you're acknowledging that they are guesses, they don't work and take a lot of effort, it's really difficult to think about any sort of estimating.
Okay. Okay. So what do you do? I understand. I guess you must be doing it in your team. This is why you're pushing so hard for it. So when it comes to questions like when you're going to be finishing this feature, or what you're going to be working in for the next 2 weeks, or how much work you can fill into the next sprint, how do you answer this question if you're doing no estimation? Or moving a little bit further, like the most important part for us in doing estimation is that the discussions, right? So if when you have discussion, if it's a 3 or a 5, that's the most important part. It's not about the number, but you actually understand that the people that say 5 have more insights on the effort that it's going to take you to build that story. So how do you gain that with doing no estimation and not having this discussion?
Yeah, so whenever they ask us for an estimate, we don't give it because we don't believe on it. So they have to get used to how we work. It's like we don't want to lie to them. We don't know how much it's going to take. Is it going to take? What is it going to take? Like, we don't go into this discussion. But you're kind of right. Something is wrong with this picture because it seems like we have replaced what we have, the story points, with some shiny new thing.
Okay, so you didn't solve any problems. You just took the most trendy process on the market and you applied it in your team, and you have been lucky enough for your stakeholder to don't crush you. That's a good approach.
Yeah, and maybe it works because our stakeholders are allowing it, right? So you're basically right. We don't have an answer, but I still think that the truth that is behind the no estimate things is fundamental. So there must be something out there that we can use to predict this kind of thing and give an accurate answer.
Okay, so I guess we have to look into it more.
Smooth transition. So, hey, Anemari, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Really good. Remember the conversation that we had 2 weeks ago?
Like it was a moment ago, yes.
Exactly. So I wanted to bring up the topic of no estimates because the other day something happened. So our PO, since we are still in the beginning of the quarter, he asked us for when we are going to finish the next 5 features according to plan. So
well, you said it's going to be done when it's going to be done, right? You're doing no estimate, so.
Not this time. This time we gave him the most accurate answer possible.
Okay, so are you estimating now, or?
Not exactly. So this time, we sat with him and we explained that we are 80% sure that we can finish this before December 31st.
Okay, that sounds like a really optimistic number.
Well, do you want to know more?
Yes, please.
So you have seen this kind of picture, right?
It looks like a burned out chart or something like that.
Exactly. So it shows where you are right now, how much work you have accomplished to deliver. And if someone asks you, okay, when are you going to finish all that is left? How do you do?
Well, probably I will just draw a line and do an average on this and predict on where I'm going to be in the future.
Exactly. So you will look into what you did until this time and you will try to infer. And normally we use a kind of an average to this kind of stuff. to infer what is going to happen.
Well, but the problem with average is that you don't know anything about the distribution, right? So how do you tackle that?
Exactly. That's why these normally don't work. So an average is, if you think about it, is one of the possible paths. But if you don't know any about the distribution, you can look at other paths. What taking the average? You can be super optimistic and say, okay, let's assume that because last week was super good in terms of delivery, all of the following weeks are going to be like that. So we are going to deliver super fast because we are crashing it. Or you can be pessimistic. You can take the worst week that you had in terms of delivery, and you can say, okay, from now on, all the weeks are going to be the same. These are just another two paths.
Any case of this would not work, right, in a real development process?
So the thing is, these two paths, or any paths in between, are just the possible outcomes that you can expect, just like the average.
Okay.
And what you need to do is look into this and check what's the probability of each of these outcomes. But this is not straightforward because you cannot, this is a super complicated model that you cannot understand. If you could find the perfect equation that describes how your team is going to deliver, that would be awesome. But let's face it, that's not possible. But there is something you can do. So there is this thing called bootstrapping, which is not the framework,
Are you sure?
which means that you take what you have done so far, you take a sample of the work you have, and you think, okay, this sample represents the population that I'm trying to describe. So basically, we are going to look into that. And this is the basis of probabilistic forecasting, which is what I wanted to tell you about. So
Tell me more.
are you? Yeah. So the end now. So are you a Marvel Avengers fan?
No, I'm not.
Okay, but there is this character in the last.
Well, I know Doctor Strange.
Okay, Doctor Strange, exactly. So there is this in the last movie. There is a point in which the Avengers don't know what to do next because they are facing this super villain. So this guy goes and sees all the possible futures and says, okay, this is the one we need to get. So he gets all the possible outcomes and he knows the path that we need to follow, or supposedly. So we are going to do the same, but instead of having the eye of Agamotto, which is the fancy thing that Dr.
The magical.
We can have even a better tool, which is Jira. No, I'm kidding. We are going to use data. So basically, if someone asks you, when are you going to finish the next 5 stories, you look into the past. You export what you have done. So for each of the stories, you can say, okay, we know that we opened this story in this date, and we worked on it, and then we closed it. So from this, you can derive things like the flow time of each of the stories, right?
Of course.
So you collect all this data, and what you do now is you sample it. So
Okay, you put it in the magic hat.
exactly. So if you want to predict how long is it going to take us to deliver 5 new stories, then you randomly draw 5 stories from the hat. And then you calculate the total cycle time, the delivery time. And you do it one, and another time, and another time.
Okay, but there is a problem here, right? You're assuming that the sum of the independent story time, it's the definition of how long that your future is going to be ready, which
Okay.
doesn't really work in a real team, right? In a real team, this is not the reality. In a real team, you have multiple stories working at the same time because you have multiple pairs working. So you're very pessimistic in your deduction of time because you're actually finishing earlier, hopefully.
That's true. This model is too simple and too pessimistic. The good news is that you can actually track your process, your internal process.
Okay.
So if we go back, we run the numbers again. So we can go again to Jira or whatever, export your data, your CSV file, which contains all the dates. You can not only infer your cycle times for the stories, but you can also produce a model, a statistical model that tells you, okay, this team is this likely to work in parallel during this time. So with this, you can again put all the numbers in the magic hat, but this time we are going to produce more accurate estimates. So we are going to produce what a team like us would have produced. So you will get different trials, different simulations, and you can see how in each of the simulations, how long did it take you to deliver the story. And you run this thousands of times, thousands of simulations. So once you have all the data, then you can do things with it.
Okay, what things can you do?
So for instance, if you have all the simulations, all the trials that you did, you can say, okay, in 50% of our simulations, we delivered before or in this date. So that's what it comes from the simulations. If you want to be more precise, you can see, okay, I can be more certain in this and tell you that there is 3/4 probability that we are going to deliver in 30 days, within the next 30 days.
Okay, that sounds promising.
You can actually change the wording in that you can approach someone from product and tell, and instead of talking about the number of trials, you can say, okay, we are this sure of this is going to happen.
Okay, that sounds better to use for product then. Okay, so this sounds really cool, right? Everything, but I'm just curious, what do you do if you're just starting a new team and you have no data? What do you run these things on? Like,
so the
how
thing
do you
is,
start?
if you need to kickstart this model, then you just need a few stories. It's like I was thinking the same thing you're thinking, but in the end, if you have 10, 11 stories, you can actually produce the forecasting. Of course, when you get more data, your forecast will be more accurate. But it's something that you could quick start quite early.
Or maybe just stole some data from other teams.
Yeah, that's actually a good one. You can export the model from another team, or you can use a theoretical model in the meantime. But as soon as you have 10, 11 stories, then you can kickstart your forecasting.
Okay. So what if your team changes? What if you, like, someone leaves the team, or I don't know, someone new joins the team? You have to rerun your whole model and start all over again. What happens then?
So let me ask you a question. How are you dealing with this with story points?
Well, yeah, I kind of got me there.
Okay, so the point of this kind of model is that it's always going to be more accurate. Not more certain, because maybe you have some degree of uncertainty, but at least it's not going to lie to you, because it's based on real data, the data that you see from your past, and actually it's producing a range of probabilities. It's not producing a magic number like 5 story points or this date. And the most important thing is that it can validate it. So for instance, in the event that your team starts working in a new product or in a legacy system, and you know that your delivery is going to change, your forecast is going to catch this. Because whenever you feed new data, your forecast is going to be adapting, and you are going to see it. And because you're not producing a single number, you're producing a range, you are going to see it evolving in time. On the other hand, if you need to predict or be sure that this is working, don't use all your data to produce a forecast. Instead, you just want one part of your data, produce a forecast, and then try to predict the rest of the data, the most recent one, with it. So if you see that you have your model, so what happens? What do you expect to see here with your validation data?
I would expect work, right? For my test to also work in the same successfully way as the data that I put into.
Exactly. You expect your validation data to appear within the range.
Of course.
And what happens if it takes longer to deliver that you have forecasted?
Well, I guess it just gets included at some point.
So the thing is, your model is like slowing down, and you need to adapt it. But also, it can happen that your forecast is too pessimistic, right? And you deliver even sooner than you expected. It's not in the core of your prediction. So this is some things that you can do.
Okay,
and
so I can start this even if I have no data. Like, sounds like it's a promising spot.
Yeah.
Okay, so this sounds interesting. So if I want to start trying it tomorrow, what do I have to do? Like, do I need to build a script or something that uses this data, or?
So according to what I've seen, some people is using their own Python scripts, and they are exporting their data to do this kind of thing. But there are tools actually out there. Some tools are paid, some tools are free, and there's even a Jira plugin that you can plug it in. So you have no excuse to run it.
Okay, I will definitely try it out. But okay, so if I try it out, I still have to sell it to the team, right? So I'm thinking now how I do that. Probably I would just prove them that they're wrong, and whatever we have right now, it's not working, and convince them. Okay, that's a good start. So yeah, that's it. We defined some patterns for estimation. We showed you different ways of doing it instead of using story points. I'm Anemari. This is Javi. We are both software developers. We work at ThoughtWorks, and we deal with these discussions every day. So with our clients, with our team, every day and at least every planning, we're fighting about estimation. Should we do it? It's not working, but what else? So we started looking into this probabilistic forecasting, and we also tried this blink estimates with some teams. Yeah, I mean, that's why this talk is about sharing you also, so you can also start digging into it. In conclusion, what we would like you to get out of this presentation is that, first of all, there's no right answer. So we don't want to get in any extreme, like just stop doing the estimations tomorrow, or just go directly with the most easy thing, which is estimation or story points. So we want you to go out there and try to find your answers. Starting with the question, if does your estimates work right now in your team? So if you go back to your team and put this question on the table, what answer you will get? That's your starting point. Based on the answer to this question, if the answer is yes, then you have to ask yourself, well, how much time do I spend in order to get to this estimation, right? Because that's also important. Estimation should be easy, and this is why no estimates are pushing for. Yeah, so they are pushing for estimation with minimal effort. They are not pushing for extreme, let's drop everything, not tell anything to our stakeholders approach, right? So that's it.
So if you adopt these ideas, if you look at your data, your guesstimates don't work, and you are spending a lot of effort, and you still want to answer these questions, so for you to know that there are other tools that people is using since years ago, and they will provide you accurate answers. But sometimes the most accurate answer is that what makes uncertainty explicit. So you don't know for sure that it is going to take you 10, 12 days, but you have a range at least, so you can show your uncertainty. So if your backlog is full of stories of different size, this range is going to reflect it. It's going to show a bigger range, a bigger uncertainty. So you should try it. And of course, as we were saying, the next challenge is how you sell it. Because it cannot be like, hey, remember that time when we introduced you to story points? Now is this. This is the thing that you need to learn, this magical thing. So there is a challenge here, of course. And if you are interested in this topic, there are lots of noise, lots of debate. There is a hashtag #NoEstimates that if you follow, you will see lots of people insulting each other and stuff. But really, you should try it. There is actually a #NoEstimates hashtag. So, but if you want to follow someone, you can follow Liz Keogh, and she also has a blog, and she participates in this debate, but she always brings lots of sense, and let's not turn this into a radical rant or something like that.
She's really struggling to stay like right at the line and not fall in any, in any part, but.
Exactly. So this is the kind of people that you want to follow, the ones that are not dogmatic, but they follow a pragmatic approach. You can also take a look at what Matt Phillip writes. He's a colleague in ThoughtWorks, and he has this blog. And in particular, this article is a good summary and overview of the whole #NoEstimate thing. And he put there lots of references if you're interested. And if you are already working on it, you already know the topic and you want to calculate this stuff, and you want the explanation, there are so many sources that you can use, but there is this #NoEstimates project planning using Montecarlo simulation by Dimitar Bakartsev, which is a really good article, which explains the whole process, how to take the dates from Jira, turning into takt time, and from that infer the cycle time and the WIP. And then there is this super nice video from a London Kanban conference by Troy McGuinness, which is also about the technical detail and how you can deal with different complicated scenarios with that. So take a picture of this slide.
It's 50 minutes, the presentation, but it's totally worth it. Like, it's giving you all the answers.
And now we have run our forecast, and we know that you have some questions, so. Thanks.
Hello. So, what's your real experience trying to sell these to product people?
So I will tell you my experience, because we're actually like the act that we're playing here, we're having it in real life. So I'm working in a team where we still use story points. So I actually saw that this is not working. So I started looking into something else, and I got to Javi in a normal coffee break, and we started digging into this, and he can tell you exactly how he sells it to the stakeholder, because I didn't get there.
Again, based on a real story, every quarter or every once in a while when things are going wrong, our clients approach us and ask us to estimate and ask us to switch to Scrum, ask us to switch to story points because that make everyone feel safe, right? Because we are actually taking time. So the actual approach that we have used so far is just showing the shiny thing. Hey, look at all these numbers, these graphs, these cool numbers. This is science, like science in capital letters as we put in the presentation. So that's a good one to say, okay, they at least they know what they're doing. But it's not the right approach. If you want a longer impact, are you using stories in your project or are you using story points? So if you have a team that is running story points, estimations, and people is not happy, one thing that you can do that I think would be better is to do this forecasting on your own and with a group of people, experiment with it and produce results. Every week, every 2 weeks, something like that. And when you have the results, running results of the forecast, then show, okay, this is what we have been doing with story points, and this is what the forecast would have said. So which one do you want? At the very least, forecast can can replace estimation because it's not going to lie you and has a better basis. But it's a really, really challenging thing.
You can use Emma's communication skills to convince your stakeholders and team. Other questions?
I wanted to ask you about your, if you leave out, for example, one of the things that you mentioned, that the discussion when you do estimation is important. It's important to illustrate what you know and what you don't know. Do you keep this with this kind of forecast?
I think the discussions are still happening, right? So I dig a little bit into this. The discussion are happening if you're putting it on the table, right? So it's not like, I don't think that you have to have the discussion about the numbers, like you have to have the topic about the numbers in order to discussion to happen. There's always an opportunity. For example, you can take some time every quarter or every 1 month to look at your data, look at your forecasting, look at your model, see how precise you were, and having those discussions then, right? Or you can do it every retrospective and trying to understand where you are with the plan and why is it not happening, why you're not on track. So the discussions, and you can get deeper at the story level and understanding, okay, what is the story that we are like, the extremes, what did this make, so you can still have the discussion, if because that's the important part. It doesn't require you to have the 3-5 topic. Yeah?
Hi. So I have a question, like how this correlates with the way you build the backlog. Because my understanding is that you are not taking into consideration and you are using no estimate, so any kind of story like deliver, it gets into the Montecarlo simulation and it gets estimated based on the historical. So in my experience, I've been using estimates, no estimates for a long time. So what we found that it really helped was to have like the backlog and the rituals around constructed in a way like was helping us to reduce the risk on the delivery. Meaning, so we were building, for example, the same kind of size of stories in terms of value delivered to the customers. So we were like doing budget allocation. We were thinking, okay, how much time do we want or to allocate to build this functionality to the customers? As we were going with similar stories in not size, but in value delivered, we were measuring what was our lead time to deliver. So with that, we could forecast a little bit if we were behind or about on time to get to the budget or the time that we set to our stakeholder that we were gonna deliver. So essentially what we were doing is reducing the scope. So we were saying, okay, we are going to be reducing the scope because we are gonna be delivering the foundation for the functionality at that time, and we were like playing with the scope on that in order to get to deliver and to meet customer satisfaction, and then to move on improving afterwards. So I found it really interesting to have that control on the backlog in order to do no estimation for our clients.
So the backlog is still there. And depending on what you mean, the backlog, the most, so we prioritize. Prioritize is always there. You don't debunk prioritization. You debunk size estimation because you cannot do it well. You cannot estimate in time and you cannot estimate in story points. Maybe you can do it, but at least prove it. At least look at your data. On the backlog, still prioritize. We still prioritize all the time. Every quarter or every 6 months, we run the missions, we run the OKRs, every strategy that you have to align the most important things. And you put there the budget objectives, but an objective is where you are heading to. It's not a size or something. It's where you are getting. So prioritize, and if you approach the no estimate the radical way, it's like only build what is important, and then the next thing that is important, but just focus on one thing. But you don't necessarily have to do that. On the other hand, you were saying that more or less you produce a forecast, and you get there, but you need to validate that as well.
We were using more like a backlog just in time. So we were having like a 1 week cycle where we were like essentially creating backlog for the next week. So essentially we were like adapting scope constantly based on the delivered output to the customer.
So you are doing something like a Scrum sprint, but without a super big backlog behind.
It was like a Kanban, but just with a week cycle in order to synchronize about.
Okay. This is an open process that, of course, you need to approach. And by the way, we are not super experts. We're just in the beginning of the learning curve. So we are experimenting with things.
Great.
Thanks.
More questions?
Hi, thanks for the talk. How does it work in terms of complexity in number of people? Have you find those magic numbers in which numbers of topics in the team and number of people really works well with those methods?
You mean if you can infer from the number of people the parameters of the model or stuff like that?
Yeah, or backwards. How, with the model, can I know which is the optimal number of people that is going to work well?
Correct me if I'm wrong, if I don't understand your question properly, but the idea is that you start with the data. So I understand you're asking if you have the model, how do you run it backwards? But you have no model if you have no data, right? So the idea is that you start from something like the way the team is right now and how many people, how many resources, and then you run the model and then you get a range, right? So the idea is that that range should kind of include any change that would happen to your team. Of course, if it's not, I don't know, it is only one person left after 8. So those ranges should cover any change, but tracing it back, the idea is to start from the data up. Of course, then you can look, why is my model like this or like this? And play maybe with the parameters, right, with the data, and see what would you come up with. I don't know, if my team would be bigger, or you can run those forecasting, of course, on different data, but running it back, it's a little bit more complicated. Does this answer your question?
How many people do you need for those models? What I mean is, those model is a forecasting model, and it has a range of people in which it is tested, right?
No. So you don't start from, you start from what you have.
Okay.
So you have a team with 3 or 8 people, and you have this number of story. That's what you run on.
So there is not optimal team size?
No, there's not such thing. You have your own number, but on your own data. No worries.
We still have 20 minutes for more questions, so please go ahead.
Quick. Maybe you can share your experiences, like, I don't know, your frustration. I have frustration, for example, in my team with the story points. Like, every planning, it's actually happening. Like, why do we discuss this? Can we do it another way? Like, this is not working. I mean, honestly, like, I just want to move on and talk about important things and not about if it's a 3 or a 5. Why we have this conversation now in the planning? Why didn't we understand this in the grooming? Why is the story bigger than what we thought about, right? Because this is changing our whole plan for the future. So, I don't know, if someone wants to share here?
You said you're still using story points in your team.
In my team, yes. They don't. We do, yes.
Do you have an agreement about what complexity is?
Yes. So we started, this is the first thing we tried to do. So getting a common agreement on what complexity is, so we can estimate in the same idea, right? But so we said complexity for us is like we don't include dependencies because dependencies is like a very influential thing. So it was like effort based on knowledge, something like that, right? But that also comes with, you know, a little bit of misunderstanding. And usually what we notice is that it's very comes to the individual, right? So usually the difference between a 3 and a 5, it's driven by fear. It's like, I don't know what I'm gonna get there, right? So it's like, I'm not sure what I'm afraid of, but I think it's a 5 because I want to cover the idea that I find something. So we tackle that things and we try to dig into it. Like, why do you think? Why are you afraid of? What if we just go with the 3 for now and we try to understand later if we have to maybe build another story? Or so the idea is that we started with an understanding. It's not working very great, but we tackle it constantly, right? We try to understand constantly where is the difference between our understandings.
Sorry, what did you mean dependencies? You said you don't
Yes.
consider.
So dependencies, like for example, you need an API to be built by another team in order for your feature to be ready. So that's dependency basically. You don't know. You have some estimates from them, but it's like in your case, you're not sure.
If you have a constant dependency, we know a team in our office that what they did was use forecasting for an external team, which they depend on. If they depend on X team and they have been depending on them, so they know how this team works, they have past data every time we ask them to do this feature for us because they own the product. It took so long. So they model it as a black box and they can forecast, okay, if we ask for this, even if it's what is normally considered a blocker, we don't work at, why not modeling it and have an expectation? So it's another place where you can use the tool.
Sorry, there is this thing that I have the feeling that I should have understood from the presentation, but I think I didn't.
Probably because we rushed a lot.
You say that you are not using story points, right? But you have to give some input. What measure is that input? What is it?
So we have a backlog, and we have a product lead, a product owner that collects all the things. Some of them are bugs that are there and prioritized. We have that. And we have a Kanban board as anyone uses in Jira or Trello or everything. So how the things move from A to B, right? From the backlog. So we do these refinement sessions every week. And maybe I kind of lie because we do an estimate, but just only one and the smallest estimate that you can do. Is this ready to be developed, or is this not? So it's like a line, and it's like an implicit knowledge of can I work on this, or I'm not sure what you're asking.
So when you say I'm gonna first by the 31st of December with this amount of certainty, 85%, you are saying that what you're saying I am going to fit this amount of stories. So you're basically assuming that all of the stories and bugs have the same size. Everything has a complexity of 1. No?
That's a really good question. So I think I mentioned earlier that your model is going to reflect what you do in your team. So you can have your stories, if you represent them in the time, like in the histogram that we were showing, maybe they are similar among each other, right?
Yeah.
And they are around some number. So it's not that your forecast is only going to work if all your stories are around this size. It's that your forecast is going to tell you, look, man, I don't know, because sometimes you are delivering this and sometimes you are delivering this. So by having a force mechanism of saying this is ready, this is way too big, let's split it, let's find a smaller functionality, you can tackle this. But the forecast, you can do it anyway.
Okay. Yep, I think so.
Again? Well, there are the people. Okay. Let me just.
Hi. I think that it's also important to understand why are you estimating.
Yes.
So do you have an agreement? I mean, have you ever asked that question to your team?
Yes, we did, and it's coming often back in our minds and back in our discussions. Why do we do estimates? And usually it's the normal answer because someone asks us to. Because unfortunately, like at least from the business side, right, they need to have some sort of a plan, and that plan translates in our work as estimates. So we have this discussion constantly. We actually ask our PM or our client, why do you do this? Why don't we try something else? But the problem we've been facing until now, where I really want to try this probabilistic forecasting, is because if you give a question or you give a problem, you have to come up with a solution. If you don't give a solution, then your question is just, yeah, it doesn't work. Well, what else? So I think we've been asking this question, and now we have a better answer. And I think I also have a solution, so I can come back and re-put this on the table on the team and start having a discussion, because it's a better point to start.
Yeah, I will say that, from my experience, when you need to do this kind of process, estimating, like, getting into a room and trying to figure out what's the size of the backlog, what's the cost, right, of the features that you want to implement, is because there's misalignment between the team that is working on the problem and the team that is working on the solution, right? So usually you have like this process of defining what's the next thing that you want to solve from the product team, right? And that comes to some sort of artifact that it's being handed off from the product team to the engineering team, right? So the product team asks, what's the cost of this? How much time is going to take you to build this or that, right? So after that, the team, get to a room, estimate, and goes back to the product team and says, okay, this is going to cost me like 5 or 10 or whatever, right? So instead of doing that process of handoff, between both teams, right? From my experience, what works, better, right, is to try to have those two teams working together, right, in order to avoid, right, to do that process of handoff between them, right? So usually it's just a conversation between them. You plan for a backlog that is small enough for you to build, right? And after that is just, try to get as rapid feedback as you can. And
that's a very good point, and I just want to make sure that, like, we actually do that. So we don't just, I don't know if I express myself wrong, but we don't just get things from the product side and we have to decide how long it's going to take us regardless of what that is. So we actually have a very good relationship with our client and with our PM. I think we're lucky to say that in this specific case, because we can actually challenge any idea or any product that it's on the table, trying to understand the value. What do you want to get out of this? Is it worth it to, like, I don't know, maybe we usually, if it's something that we built in the past, like something the same, we use those numbers, for example, because that's real data, right? It took us three months to do this. Like, are you getting the revenue from that product in order to do it again, for example, in another country? So what I'm trying to say is that we have the discussion with our client, and we are in the situation where we are all in the room and we decide together what we're going to be built on, and the estimation are happening with the client. Like, they are, and PM in this case, they are inside of our discussion of estimation. So it's not separate, and it does help. I totally agree with you. It's a different experience.
Yeah, also try to, structure the conversation around the value instead of the cost.
Of course. Yeah. That's always normal.
I'm working in a team where there are different profiles. We are a couple of more senior developers, and there are quite a lot of junior developers. And we are estimating, but it's a fucking disaster. Okay, but I don't mind, because it's just we have to work. But they are asking us to do estimate, and it's a disaster. Do you think that this model can work for a team where the rhythm of deploying things is very irregular? In this case, it happens because we have a lot of junior people that sometimes they go okay, but sometimes they get stuck in something, and I don't know,
Irregular, you said.
Yeah.
So sometimes, depending on who's speaking the story can be.
Yeah.
Back to the forecast will reflect that. But looks more like your process is allowing this to happen. So we pair a lot. We pair by default. We do pair programming by default. And one of the outcomes of pairing is going to reduce that gap. And there are even more extreme strategies. There is one, I don't remember the name of this this game, but it's basically the expert don't do the commit. The expert is only there, and then the other people has to do the commit. So there are many ways of making sure that, but that's more like a team thing, right? A team flow or a knowledge sharing thing. So you can focus on these practices, share the knowledge, and reduce the gap. Otherwise, your forecast is going to basically depict that gap. Luis?
What I receive from the process of the estimations is, for one part, it's having all the developers on the same page, and maybe making the effort to say it's 3 or it's 10 can help me to identify that maybe there are some silos problems on the about some topics or something like this, or maybe that you are understanding that you have to do a lot of things instead of a simple solution, and that estimation can enable the product owner to simplify or reduce the scope. And I think it's also important because, well, if you have other places, other meetings, or other process that you can get the same benefit from that, I think that no estimate could work. But I don't really know if the teams makes no estimation. The alternative is receiving the user stories directly on the Jira or something like this without having any talk. No, but this is in your reality. But what I like is the estimation is that it forces you to having these conversations that maybe otherwise it's, I don't know, you have to do these things, and when you start to implement it, because there is no space to talk with the product owner, these kind of things, and it's what I like. If you have a different techniques or spaces, I think could be a good idea.
So you're saying that the estimation sessions are for you a way of talking to the business and like showing that it's more complex, and maybe they can rediscuss the scope and everything, right? So that's like your opportunity to come and have the discussions together with the team and the product. I think so. Yes, it's very important to have the discussions. So I think we all agree on that. But those discussions can happen, right? You can build opportunities for you for those discussions to happen, and it doesn't have to be called an estimation session. Maybe it's easier because maybe the business it's like, because you have this thing that everybody knows about, it's easier to push for it, right? So you say you have an estimation, and saying, we know, let's have a meeting about our value, let's have a meeting about our scope, which is more complicated. But what I'm trying to say is that definitely you have to have these discussions, and you have to have ways of doing it, but you can build other ways. And other ways are maybe just a meeting which is not called estimation, in which you don't give numbers and you just ask these questions. Is this scope too big? Like, are we actually providing value? All the questions, like, they can happen in different ways. And baby steps. Maybe you, like, some people in the team start talking with the product, and then all the team gets involved. I really believe that there are other ways of doing it. Maybe mentioning in the retro, starts becoming a thing, and then it's more. I think frustration really helps teams to start, getting into a new project. So if you feel frustration enough, and you can see others are doing it, you can easily convince them that they should start doing something else.
Thank you.
It seems to me the really important change here is the change from trying to decide as a team what the complexity of a story is, which is really hard to decide. So you're changing to, is this story ready or not? Is that right?
Ready for them.
Yeah.
That's the word.
So, which is useful because then you can address people's fears about why a story might not be ready or not. But when you're using the system, how do you know when a story is ready? Does like everyone have to be confident that it's ready, or?
So this system is one side. This, if you mean the forecast, or the forecast plus the yes or no.
Yeah, the yes or no part.
Okay, the yes or no is going to raise up all the questions. And as you were saying before, this conversation has to be taken by the team and the stakeholders, everyone in the same room, as Anemari was saying. But you change the goal, so you reduce the waste, because in the end, I don't care if it's a 3 or a 5, because I have the forecast to try to infer these kind of things. But I want if I'm able to work on it or not. And if someone says no, because we want to be all like yes, if someone says no, then we need to do another refinement session or keep discussing. So it's like a flag that you put. And that's the occasion in which you can say, I don't fully understand this, or I don't know this because X person is the only one who knows about this. I don't understand the phrasing in the story. So it will make the team better if you are really, really strict with your requirements. We actually have our requirements put there in a wiki page, which says this is what ready for dev looks like. So if it doesn't have these things, this is a no. And even though it might look like a yes, but it's enough for 1 people out of 7 to say no. If I'm the one doing this, no way, I'm not doing it.
Thanks.
Regarding complexity, actually, because you asked me before about how do we align, we actually started doing this to address the problem of not being on the same page. So we together came up with some questions that we need to answer for each story before that gets into ready for dev. And it can be things that we learned from the past, that this feature needs to be toggled, what's our testing strategy. So all the things that, and this is from learning. We keep adding to that list, which is not very long, like maybe 7 questions, which we all have to have answers to, and it will definitely, make us more safe with our decisions. So we are using this checklist, in also to address this.
Yeah, I guess I was just wanted to add that I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, like a definition of done or a definition of ready for dev or anything, or has little to do with estimations or no estimations, right? Like that's a list that will always be present in every refinement, in every kickoff, for every story or whatever. It's just that in the case they're suggesting in one of their teams, one of these check points is an estimate on a story. In the other case, they take that point out of that list because the estimate or the forecasting, which is what you want to have at the end, is done through different means that is not the estimations, right? Yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions, sharings, complaints?
One more question. Have you validated this model? I mean, something like a team working with this approach for a year and then now they are estimating better than before?
I know a team in our, which is standing right across to me, which is perfectly working for them. And it's actually the team that did the forecasting also for the other team they had dependencies on. So, I mean, I have proved that it's working. This is why I want to start using it in my team.
And do you know how much data do you need to start to get a real or an accurate model?
So I lost the references, but maybe it's blocked, right? Yeah. Just a moment. So in the article here, sorry, not in the article, in the video, Fast No Estimates Forecasting, he makes the point, you only need 10, 11 stories to produce a solid forecast. So that's why I was saying, if you don't have any data, don't worry, don't lie, don't say, I'm going to have this in 2 weeks because it's a lie. You don't have to adopt a guesstimate. You say, okay, let's kickstart this, focus on the most important thing, but by the time you have 10, 11, 12 stories, they will reflect, according to bootstrapping, they will reflect the model, the population of your stories, so you can start kickstarting. And of course, when you have more data, the model will be more accurate. So try to be really conservative at the beginning, not to risk anything.
So I've been thinking, while you were talking about the no estimates, about, well, it's something that it has been already asked, but it's the definition, or at least talking through the risks when developing something like dependencies on other APIs or maybe business opportunities. And I'm trying to come out to a conclusion on if these risks
are still identified all at the beginning, or like, for example, that discussion of is this ready or not, like it wouldn't be ready if there's a obvious risk. And what it gives me, the estimations, is also that conversation, which you're probably doing there. So the question is, does this model also kind of predict those risks, or give you like some kind of feedback of the risks that you haven't identified?
When you have the data, the new data, only in some cases. So if you start working on if you inherit a legacy project that you start working, you will see our model is changing. Like, or we have two modes. We have in the model we have some stories that where we used to be, and suddenly there is like a small new thing happening in the forecast, which is all the stories from the new product. But a posteriori, not a priori. A priori you can make guesses, but we are not here to guess. So.
Right, so you would see from the model that things take longer because it's a different environment. But that doesn't tell you why they take longer. That's the risk I'm trying to identify.
Good point. It just flags something is happening, and then you will have to, but it's like if you are trying any KPI in your product, and suddenly you introduce a feature or a change, you have a metric and you have to find the correlation and then verify the causation. So it's as any metric, you have to find the cause backwards. So it's not, I think you can still do it, because the important thing, and this is something that we are still not doing, is to do this forecasting periodically. Not at the beginning of the quarter when someone asks us for a question, but track it for ourselves and have, okay, this is the range where we are going to be next week. This is the range we're going to be next week. So have this tracked so that you can see, okay, this range is increasing or is moving up or is moving down. So you can have this.
Yeah, I think that's just an idea to feed more to the model. Like if you can, based on your experience, that you have encountered a risk that you weren't able to predict, that would also help you be more accurate in those risks.
Yep.
So time's up. It's time for lunch. I don't know if someone wants to ask one last question. Is that because I said there's lunch?
Thank you very much.